Liang Yuanze abruptly turned, his rage boiling over as he aimed to confront Fu Xinqing. But He Yan, gripped by fear, clung desperately to his waist, her voice trembling as she implored, Yuanze, Yuanze, please, let's go. I beg you. Liang Yuanze attempted to shake her off repeatedly, but she clung tenaciously. In the end, all he could do was point accusingly at Fu Xinqing, his voice seething with anger, you heartless bastard. A dangerous glint flashed in Fu Xinqing's eyes, and he warned in a grave tone, Liang Yuanze, be very careful where you point that finger. Unable to contain her tears, He Yan clung to Liang Yuanze's waist, her face buried in his back as she sobbed, Yuanze, come with me. Let's not create a scene, I can't bear this, it's tearing me apart. Please, preserve what's left of my dignity. Liang Yuanze stood there in silence for a moment, his voice finally tinged with resignation. All right, I'll go with you. Once they were outside Fu Enterprises, Liang Yuanze fixed his gaze on He Yan and spoke deliberately, Yan Yan, tell me everything. What's going on? Be honest with me. Keeping this from me is more painful than any betrayal. He Yan met his gaze, her words filled with determination, let's go home, and I'll tell you everything. In their living room, He Yan recounted the entire story, starting from the moment she first encountered Fu Xinqing. Liang Yuanze was initially shocked, but as her narrative unfolded, his emotions surged, and he demanded, why did you keep this from me? Why didn't you involve the police? She countered, what would I tell the police, Yuanze? If I said Shen Jijie didn't die and became Fu Xinqing, who would believe me? Where's the evidence? Livid, Yuanze erupted, then why didn't you tell me? With a bitter laugh, He Yan replied, tell you so you could recklessly pursue him? Yuanze, if it weren't for today's events, I would have preferred you hating me over divulging this. You don't understand how dangerous he is. Rage consumed Liang Yuanze's reason, and he yelled, I refuse to believe that a criminal can evade justice like this. Yan Yan, we need to call the police. He Yan clutched his arm and beseeched, Yuanze, please, be rational. His bloodshot eyes bore into her as he accused, you're telling me to be rational, to endure it like you. He Yan, you're not being rational, you're letting fear control you. Do you believe everything he says? We live in a society governed by the rule of law. What about him terrifies you so much? You weren't like this before. Trembling, He Yan questioned him, Yuanze, are you blaming me, accusing me of cowardice and willingly succumbing to Fu Xinqing's threats? Regret filled his eyes as he took a step closer to embrace her, his voice quivering, I'm sorry, I didn't mean that. I meant that we should be brave and seek help from the police. We can't let him continue to dictate our lives. In the tense silence that followed, He Yan's voice trembled as she uttered, Yuanze, do you even grasp the magnitude of what we're up against? I do, Liang Yuanze replied, gripping her shoulders firmly, offering what little strength he could. But before they could deliberate further, the sound of a turning door lock shattered their conversation. The door burst open, and several burly men stormed into the room. Liang Yuanze, bewildered, demanded, who are you? Without a word, one of the men struck Liang Yuanze in the face. Another man covered He Yan's mouth, instructing her, quiet, Ms. He. Turning away with He Yan in tow, the bald man fixed a stern gaze on Liang Yuanze and coldly ordered his subordinates, teach him a lesson, make it hurt. Several men immediately pounced on Liang Yuanze, subjecting him to a brutal beating. They knocked him to the ground within seconds, and as he teetered on the brink of unconsciousness, the bald man grinned maliciously and demanded, tell me, which finger did you point at Mr. Fu? Without waiting for his command, the men pinned Liang Yuanze's hands on the coffee table and shouted, speak. He Yan whimpered and struggled to reach Liang Yuanze's side. Her unexpected display of strength seemed to catch one of the men off guard, causing him to release her hand, and she tumbled onto the fallen Liang Yuanze. Desperation drove her to cry out, I want to see Fu Xinqing. I demand to meet him. The bald man's anger flared, and he scolded his subordinates, incompetents. Get Ms. He away from here. Be gentle, don't harm her. He Yan pleaded through muffled sobs, please, I'm begging you. But Liang Yuanze, despite his excruciating pain, hissed, He Yan, stop this. Don't plead with these monsters. The bald man applauded mockingly, well said. Quite the display of courage. He then grabbed Liang Yuanze's hand and placed it on the coffee table. Look closely, sir. Today, I only require one finger. As the knife descended, forcibly severing Liang Yuanze's right index finger, he screamed in unbearable agony. However, he swallowed his cries as quickly as they emerged. In the haze of his unconsciousness, Liang Yuanze mumbled, tell Fu Xinqing that he can have my life as long as he releases Yan. At the hospital, the doctor inquired about the whereabouts of Liang Yuanze's severed finger and mentioned that if it was handled promptly, there was a good chance of successfully reattaching it. He Yan's calm demeanor concealed her inner panic, though the sweat on her face betrayed her anxiety. She entrusted Liang Yuan's treatment to the medical staff and, clutching her phone, dialed Fu Xinqing's number. His response was curt, "I'm in a meeting. Make it quick if you have something to say." He Yan choked back her tears and pleaded desperately, "Fu Xinqing, I beg you. Please, return Yuan's finger. I'm begging you." However, Fu Xinqing remained silent, ending the call abruptly. With repeated attempts to contact him, she realized her number had been blocked. He Yan closed her eyes in hopelessness. After a moment of silent contemplation, she dashed out of the hospital, got into her car, and sped toward Fu Enterprises building. As she arrived, Jiang tried to obstruct her, stating, "Mr. Fu is currently in a meeting." Ignoring his words, He Yan brushed past Jiang and barged into Fu Xinqing's conference room. The bright lights illuminated the meeting in progress, and Fu Xinqing's gaze turned icy upon her entrance. Desperately trying to control her rapid breathing, He Yan spoke with a steady voice, "Mr. Fu, may I have a moment, please? I have something important to tell you." Fu Xinqing's cold gaze remained fixed on her as he replied curtly, "I'm in a meeting." Despair flickered in He Yan's eyes, and she trembled, "Fu Xinqing, please." Without a word, Fu Xinqing abruptly rose from his seat, leaving the Fu executives behind, and followed He Yan into his office. He Yan stepped forward, her voice quivering as she implored, "Fu Xinqing, it's me you have a grudge against. If you want revenge, come after me. Don't harm the innocent, please." Fu Xinqing glanced at her and uttered coldly, "Actions have consequences." "Is the price one finger?" she asked. He Yan produced a Swiss Army knife seemingly out of thin air, opened the blade, and held it to her index finger. She inquired with determination, "I'll pay in his stead." Fu Xinqing raised an eyebrow, sneering as he mocked her, "He Yan, are you trying to blackmail me with your own life? Are you joking?" Before he could finish speaking, He Yan swiftly slashed her finger with the knife. Instinctively, Fu Xinqing grabbed her wrist, wrested the knife from her grip, and slammed it onto the ground. He pulled her close, his voice strained, "He Yan." Tears welled up in her eyes as she knelt before him, clasping his leg and pleading, "Shenjijie, please, return the severed finger. I don't want to carry the guilt of his disability for the rest of my life. I don't want him to suffer because of me." Fu Xinqing clenched his teeth in frustration, torn between anger and despair. He called Xiao Wu urgently, demanding, "Where is the severed finger?" Xiao Wu replied cautiously, "Not too far. We left it on some random street." Fu Xinqing ordered, "Find it immediately. I'll be there soon." A while later, He Yan and Fu Xinqing arrived at the location where Baldhead had parked. She met Baldhead directly, and he informed her, "Ms. He, I've searched for it, but it's not there. Perhaps a stray animal carried it away." He Yan gazed at him coldly, bypassing him without straightening her posture and continuing her search. Suddenly, she stopped in her tracks and knelt down, her eyes fixed on a particular spot. She had finally found Liang Yuan's severed finger, but it had not been carried away by an animal. Instead, it had been flattened and smeared on the ground, a gruesome mess of flesh and blood that she could not pick up. He Yan slowly bent down, her forehead touching the cold pavement as she curled into a small, trembling ball. She couldn't help but recall the happiness they had shared when they first got married, a stark contrast to the agony that now consumed their lives. He Yan's body quivered faintly, but she dared not dwell on her thoughts any longer. She bit down hard on her lip to stifle any cries. Crying wouldn't help, wouldn't bring back Yuan's finger, or deliver Fu Xinqing and his henchmen to justice. It would only vent her frustration. She harbored a deep, seething hatred, and what it craved was not an emotional release but revenge. Unbeknownst to He Yan, Fu Xinqing had approached her, his tone cold as he ordered, "Get up." With a slight tremor, she slowly rose to her feet. Her body was weak, but Fu Xinqing steadied her, preventing her from collapsing. With her head gently resting on his shoulder, He Yan inquired in a low voice, "Fu Xinqing, do you know how much I hate you now?" He scoffed dismissively, asking, "How much?" He Yan replied with conviction, "I can't wait to sink my teeth into your flesh, tear it apart, and savor it." Hearing her words, Fu Xinqing sneered, "Very well, as long as you have the means to follow through." Without uttering a word, He Yan stared at him, then opened her mouth and sank her teeth into his shoulder. Her bite was surprisingly forceful, and Fu Xinqing looked down at her, unfazed, as she bit into him. After a while, he gently raised her face with his hand and kissed her passionately, ignoring the tears and snot that streamed down her face. In her anger, she fought back, no longer evading him. Instead, she bit his lips with her teeth. While Fu Xinqing was seemingly relishing He Yan's fury, Xiao Wu approached them and murmured, "Brother Xing, Liang Yuanze has called the police." He Yan visibly trembled upon hearing those words. There was a new wound on the corner of Fu Xinqing's mouth. He turned to look at her and offered a cold smile, saying, "It's not that I won't let him, but he keeps courting death time and again." "He Yan, what do you think I should do?" Yan grabbed his hand and implored, "Give me a chance, Fu Xinqing. I'll correct the police report immediately." Wearing a smirk, he replied, "You may have one more chance, but your actions here will determine whether Liang Yuanze lives or dies." With that, Fu Xinqing departed, instructing Jiang to provide He Yan with some fresh clothes. When He Yan arrived at the hospital, the police officer noted down her statements and concluded, "Ms. He, we will thoroughly investigate this case. I hope you can calm Mr. Liang. He is quite emotional right now." She stood there quietly, watching Liang Yuanze, who was sitting with his head bowed. He Yan walked over and sat across from him. She lowered her gaze for a moment and whispered, "I'm sorry, Yuanze." Without letting her finish, he hugged her and reassured, "Don't be afraid, Yan. I've already told the police everything and requested them to ensure your parents' safety." Fu Xinqing wouldn't dare to do anything else. "You have to believe that in this world, evil doesn't triumph over good." He Yan whispered back, "Yuanze, things aren't as simple as you think." Fu Xinqing didn't leave any evidence. "Of course," Liang Yuanze replied, thinking everything was straightforward. But Yan urged him to sit calmly and made a request, "Yuanze, I only want you to live. So, no matter what the investigation results are, please don't provoke Fu Xinqing." The police officers handling the case looked at Liang Yuanze and said, "Mr. Liang, we've reviewed the surveillance footage from Fu Group in your home, but we found no evidence indicating that Fu Xinqing physically harmed you. Moreover, Miss Yan has confirmed that the three of you were involved in a domestic lovers' quarrel." Liang Yuanze's expression remained surprisingly calm, perhaps after learning about He Yan's confession. He wasn't foolish, he merely preferred to bask in the sunlight and see the world as beautiful. As he exited the police station, he asked Yan quietly, "He Yan, are you sure you're doing the right thing?" She lowered her voice, articulating each word clearly, "Yuanze, you can choose to hate me and then forget me. You can also choose to keep loving me, but you must distance yourself from me to escape Fu Xinqing's control. Help me save my parents." He still stood there with his hands at his sides and asked, "What about you?" She tightened her grip on his waist and replied with a deep-seated hatred, "I have to descend into hell, kill Fu Xinqing, and return double the pain and suffering he has inflicted upon us." He buried his head on her shoulder like a child and admitted in a hoarse voice, "I hate myself, Yan. I hate my powerlessness, my inability to protect you. I hate that I can only watch you suffer and be humiliated." The honking of the car behind them reminded them of Fu Xinqing's dwindling patience. He Yan gritted her teeth and firmly pushed Liang Yuanze away. She locked eyes with him, saying, "Maybe you can't protect me, but you can save me. Yuanze, the farther you go, the better. But you still have to keep a part of your heart for me, okay? Wait for me at the gates of hell. If, by some chance, I'm still alive at the end, and you're not repulsed by me, extend your hand to pull me out, okay?" He Yan turned around and gracefully entered the car. As she bent down to get in, Fu Xinqing sneered, "What? No tears and sobbing? I thought you ill-fated lovebirds would be weeping in each other's arms." He Yan gazed at him coldly and retorted, "Fu Xinqing, don't say such strange things to me and make yourself look like a jealous little man. You're supposed to seek revenge on me, not fall in love with me." He stumbled over his words for a moment, then smiled at her again, saying, "He Yan, are you afraid of me falling in love with you, or are you scared that one day you will fall in love with me?" She scowled and smiled disdainfully, "What could I possibly love about you? Your cruelty, your depravity, or your contemptibility and shamelessness? Fu Xinqing, what do you have that would deserve my love?" He responded slowly, "I'm handsome, powerful, I can pamper you and give you everything you want. Most importantly, I can provide services befitting a woman like you." Unable to tolerate his words any longer, she scolded him in a low voice, "Fu Xinqing, you truly have no shame." He chuckled and asked maliciously, "I'm only speaking the truth. If not, please tell me which of my statements is incorrect." He Yan's face flushed with anger, and she stared at him furiously, refusing to respond. In the midst of their banter, he softly ordered, "Come here, Yan." She guessed his intentions and couldn't help but curse him, "Fu Xinqing, you're like a lecher, always ready anytime, anywhere." He couldn't help but chuckle and retorted, "Don't insult yourself like that. If I'm a dog, doesn't that make you my bitch?" Amidst their playful exchange, the car came to a stop. Fu Xinqing said, "Since your parents called you, I'll let you go early for now. Come to me tonight after this." He Yan angrily pushed him away, opened the door, and stepped out of the car. After she finished her business and returned from the bathroom, she turned to her wardrobe to choose an outfit for the evening. She had a good understanding of Fu Xinxing's preferences. He liked women from respectable backgrounds but only cared for their appearances in the bedroom. In front of the large mirror in the bathroom, she carefully applied makeup, deliberately choosing an intense, bold red lipstick to seduce him. She also grabbed a pack of sanitary pads and some painkillers before heading to the party. That night, amidst the falling snowflakes, Fu Xinxing was seated at a mahjong table, tiles in hand. When he heard a noise, Xiao Wu, seated beside him, greeted He Yan with a smile. "Miss Yan is here. Are you the savior our brother invited?" Fu Xinxing raised an eyebrow slightly and turned to look at her more closely. He noticed that she appeared even paler than usual, and her red lips lacked their usual moist luster. As Yan approached Fu Xinxing, she casually moved one of his mahjong tiles, but suddenly, Fu Xinxing stretched out his arms and hugged her. Xiao Wu exaggeratedly covered his eyes with his hands and exclaimed, "Brother, you can't do that in front of the kids. You'll corrupt the youngsters." A thin man wearing glasses on the opposite side chimed in with a deadpan tone, "Brother Xing, I'm already 18, so don't mind me. Do as you please." As He Yan leaned over to grab a mahjong tile, her form-fitting dress outlined her most alluring curves. Subconsciously or not, the man with glasses couldn't help but let his gaze wander. Fu Xinxing felt a pang of irritation and pulled her back without thinking, gripping her waist tightly with his hands and placing her on his lap. He Yan looked puzzled and glanced down at him. Sitting beside the man was a young model who smiled delicately and said, "Ah Bing, stop looking already, your eyeballs are about to fall onto Miss Yan's chest. Also, Brother Xing sure can hold it in. If I were in your place, I would have taken Miss Yan right here." Fu Xinxing raised his eyes and asked her coldly, "What did you call me?" Upon hearing Fu Xinxing's question, the young model didn't dare to hold back and timidly replied, "Brother Xing." The man who had brought the young model grabbed her by the hair, yelling at her, "How dare trash like you call Brother Xing's name so casually? Get lost." Amidst the commotion, He Yan stated, "Hey, Brother Xiao Wu, it's your turn to play." Fu Xinxing suddenly whispered in her ear through gritted teeth, "Did you wear this dress to make me take you right here and now?" Following his lead, she put her mouth close to his ear and responded in a low voice, "A lecher finds everything suggestive." With that, she started playing mahjong seriously and ended up winning the game with a self-picked tile. After winning the game, He Yan looked up and suddenly asked, "Brother Xiao Wu, where's the bald guy who was with you?" Xiao Wu smiled at He Yan and replied, "Who knows where that kid ran off to? Why do you ask? Does Sister Yan have something to do with him?" He Yan flashed a fake smile at Xiao Wu and said, "Then I have to trouble you to tell him to find me when he has time. 1. To return my key, and 2, I need something from him." She deliberately emphasized the words, "need something from him." For any eavesdroppers, it would seem like she was arrogantly seeking retribution for Liang Yuan's severed finger. As expected, Fu Xinxing was genuinely affected by her assertive approach and commanded, "Xiao Wu, tell Baldhead to find Miss He tomorrow." Everyone left one by one, and soon, only Fu Xinxing and He Yan remained in the spacious room. Fu Xinxing was still seated at the mahjong table, and he sneered softly, tossing a mahjong tile onto He Yan's magazine. He asked her, "What's with the crazy act today? You've just become a mistress, and you're already trying to establish your authority?" He Yan calmly put down the magazine, looked at him, and replied, "A new broom sweeps clean. If I don't do it now, when will I? If I establish my position now, at least those shady characters won't dare to look down on me in the future." Fu Xinxing chuckled and praised, "You're quite straightforward." She teasingly pulled the corner of her lip and continued, "Unlike you. You clearly didn't like your men looking at my chest, yet you purposely picked on a young girl and said, 'What did you call me?' Acting all pretentious, how laughable. Is the title, Brother Xing, really that noble? All those street gangsters can call you that, but regular people can't." Fu Xinxing narrowed his eyes slightly, suppressed his temper, and asked her coldly, "Did you eat gunpowder today? You're firing shots at everything I say." He Yan pursed her lips and fell silent for a moment. Then she said, "I'm feeling agitated today. Don't mind me for now." Fu Xinxing still frowned at her and asked, "What's wrong?" She didn't immediately answer. Her lips trembled slightly, her face paled, and she instinctively covered her lower abdomen with her hands. She raised her eyes to see him checking her for signs of fever, so she snapped angrily, "What's so fascinating? Haven't you seen a woman suffering from menstrual cramps before?" He looked her up and down and grunted lightly, "You should have stayed home if you weren't feeling well. Why did you come here dressed like this, causing a scene?" He Yan ignored him and tried to find some water. She managed to locate a bottle of pure water, but she struggled to open it. Seeing her difficulties, Fu Xinqing got up, took the bottle from her hand, unscrewed it, and handed it back to her. He then sat down on the sofa beside her, somewhat disappointed. He remarked, "Weren't you fine this morning? Your timing seems rather convenient." Upon hearing his words, He Yan flung the painkiller tablet and leaflet at him. He was taken aback, and his face darkened as he looked at her coldly. He said, "He Yan, there's a limit to how unreasonable you can be. I'm indulging you because I'm in a good mood. I gave you an inch, don't push for a mile, don't forget who I am." He Yan's eyes welled up with tears, and her lips quivered as she said angrily, "Fu Xinqing, do you think I want to act so unreasonably? Just because you stroked the face you slapped, did you think it wouldn't hurt when touched? You're indulging me. Well, thank you so much for your indulgence." Fu Xinqing looked bewildered, and his brows slightly furrowed. He glanced at the leaflet and realized it was a painkiller. His expression softened a bit, but he still said, "He Yan, why are you being so difficult? Did my slap also cause your menstrual cramps?" She looked up at him with tearful eyes, her voice quivering, "Fu Xinqing, you're a man, you only care about your own pleasure. Do you know how many emergency contraceptives I've taken in the past few months? Do you know how many times this medicine can be taken in a year? Did I choose the timing? My menstrual cycle has been messed up for a long time. Do you think I can pick and choose when it happens?" A moment later, she laughed at herself, thinking aloud, "But it'll be fine in the future. Since Liang Yuanzi has already left, whether it's birth control or even ligation, no one will care." As she was about to leave, Fu Xinqing grabbed her wrist, hugged her from behind, and said lightly, "After venting your anger, try to relax. Take your medicine and go to bed early. I won't touch you." The next morning, when he woke up, he found that they were a little closer than the night before. He Yan's entire body was snuggled in his arms, her limbs wrapped around him like an octopus, and her head rested on his arm. Her rosy lips were slightly parted, and she was sleeping better than a child. In a good mood, he gently disentangled her from himself, got up, and went outside for his morning workout. When he returned, He Yan had already gotten up, and her complexion looked much better than the previous night. Seeing him enter the room, she said, "I'd like someone to drive me to school." He nodded slightly and then suddenly said, "About Baldhead, you can threaten him with words, but don't lay a finger on him." Around 10 o'clock, He Yan headed to the library with a few review books. Before entering, she spotted a public phone and decided to make a call. She dialed Mother Chen's number and spoke softly, "It's me, He Yan." Mother Chen's voice, while still calm, seemed to carry a hint of a smile as she replied, "I've found some records on Shinjijia and the others who were in prison. They contain a lot of Shinjijia's personal information, including his fingerprints." He Yan couldn't hide her disappointment and said, "Fingerprints won't work. Fu Xinqing either managed to change his own fingerprints or replaced the fingerprints in the file. The two won't match." Mother Chen responded with a smile, "The fingerprints in the file were indeed altered, but they were not meticulous enough and missed one in an inconspicuous place. And that one was found by this old lady." He Yan's hand clenched the microphone tightly as she spoke impatiently, "I'll visit you as soon as possible." As soon as He Yan hung up the phone, she received a call from an unknown number. When she answered, Xiao Wu's voice came through, "Miss Yan, we're almost at the lakeside location you chose.